Hi. I'm excited to introduce Carolyn Everidge-Frey and Dr. Matthew Lutz from the Ohio State Department of Education. Carolyn serves as the director in the Center for Teaching Profession at the Ohio Department of Education. She served as the state lead during Ohio's rollout of student growth measures for the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. Carolyn has also served in various leadership roles at the local level, some which have included curriculum coordinator, school improvement specialist, special education coordinator, and superintendent. Dr. Matthew Lutz serves as Director of Equity and Talent for the Ohio Department of Ed. His career is over 20 years, which includes teaching in Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. He has experience as an assistant high school principal and as a middle school principal. And we're just very excited to have him. He's also had experience in Educational Service Center. And so we welcome them and look forward to hearing about Ohio's experiences. Carolyn, Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carolyn. We're going to start with some Ohio demographics to give you guys some background on, I guess, the challenges that our state faces. Sorry, one second, trying to get my slide to advance. And I appreciated on Chad's slide that he had the statement that that these reforms are taking time to implement, and we can definitely feel that pain in Ohio. Last year was our first full year of implementation, so we're definitely in those growing stages. And one of the webinars that I listened to, maybe back in the spring, the presenter presented the changes that a teacher goes through as they go through this new evaluation system as similar to the stages that we go through when we experience the death of a loved one. And sometimes we feel like we're dying a slow death. So we feel the pain, and we're right there with you. So we do have to remind ourselves often that to stop and take stock of everything that we have accomplished along the way for the states. So for the states that are coming on board behind us, remind yourself to do that. Just stop and take stock of what you have done so far and give yourselves a little pat on the back, because sometimes that's the only one you'll get. So in Ohio, we are a local control state, and all of our public and our Race to the Top community schools were required to adopt a standards-based teacher evaluation policy that included student growth measures by July of 2013. This policy was to become operative at the expiration of their existing collective bargaining agreements. So we have over 1,000 educational entities in Ohio. A little over 600 of those are public school districts. And of those publics, about 75% were required to implement last year. During that first full year of implementation, there are over 100 that are implementing as first-timers this school year, and then around 25 or so that will implement next year. So we're constantly getting brand new questions and very advanced questions, so we have to adjust that, and we can't pull old information off of our webpage because every year there's more districts coming on board for the first time. We have over 400 community schools, and again, only our Race to the Top community schools are required to implement our new evaluation system. So it was around 250 that implemented last year during that first full year. We also have joint vocational schools and educational or regional service centers. In the combination of all of those teachers from all of the entities, the educational entities, we have over 100,000 teachers in the state. So our original House bill that initiated the new evaluation system became effective in September of 2011, and this law required 50% of a teacher's evaluation to be based on the teacher's performance on our 7 teaching standards, and the other 50% was to be based on student growth measures. And yes, that's high compared to most of the other states in the nation. So that 50-50, we'll call that the original framework, or the 50-50 you'll hear us say, is what we first started with last year. This summer, we had new legislation that introduced, and it was actually House Bill 362, and it offered an optional evaluation system, and we referenced that as the 42.5 or the alternative framework. So this year, districts could choose to either use that original 50-50, or they could choose to use this alternative framework, and it kept teacher performance on the standards and growth each at 42.5%, and offered this alternative component, which was to be at 15%. And there were 4 options that a district could choose for this alternative component, but whatever the choice, every teacher in the district had to use the one alternative component that the district identified. And those 4 options were student surveys, student portfolios, teacher self-evaluation, or peer evaluation. So for the student surveys, we actually did a request for qualifications, and we have a very small list of vendors that districts can choose from as that student survey option. And if they chose one of the other 3, the student portfolio, the teacher self-evaluation, or the peer evaluation, they're required to use the forms that ODE has created. So those were processes that we created and posted online for the districts to use. In the beginning stages of implementing a new evaluation system, it's really all about survival for the locals. The administrators and the teachers feel overwhelmed, and they constantly want or need the assurance that they're doing things the right way because they don't want to get in trouble for doing something wrong or for not doing something. So the question always comes up as, what are we required to do for this new evaluation system? Just tell me what I have to do. So we've found tables similar to this one to be very helpful from the beginning on about what are we required to do and what are you actually recommending, or what's the best practice that you recommend we follow. So these required components are required because they're in our revised code, or because they're in a document that our State Board of Education adopted, and therefore the districts are required to follow it. So our teachers annually have to have a professional growth plan. If their student growth measure is average or higher, then they're on a professional growth plan. And if they're below average, then they're required to be on an improvement plan. If their final growth at the end of the year is below average, they must be on an improvement plan. Districts can choose to put them on an improvement plan at any other point. The only requirement is that end-of-the-year growth for the state. Our law requires 2 30-minute formal observations of each teacher. The law states walkthroughs plural, so we always reference that in training as that means 2 or more. It's up to the district. And the law requires a written report for the teacher at the end summarizing the findings and their evaluation rating. Obviously, we also have the recommended that the district, the evaluator, hold a pre-conference before each observation, a post-conference after each one, a mid-year review or check-in, and then we have a performance rubric that we try to get them to use and to fill out. Obviously, some of the districts are better at doing that and giving that form to the teacher, and some just give them their final rating. But all of these components, these bulleted items on both sides of the table, are able to be entered in our electronic teacher and principal evaluation system, and then some. So our reporting system that the districts are required to use, they can use it at a bare bones minimum, which Matt will go over, or they can use it to its fullest potential. In Ohio, we have 3 types of student growth measures, and I think it's best to think about them as somewhat of a hierarchy. Value added would be the first one, because if a teacher has value added data available, they must use that data. And the value added comes from state assessments in math and reading in grades 4 through 8, science in 5 and 8, social studies in 6. And this year will be the first year for our new state assessments in the high school, and those will have, many of those, not all, will have value added. We're still making those decisions. We'll have value-added data available about this time next year for the teachers to use in their evaluation the following year. These teachers that have value-added data are called Category A teachers. If a district doesn't have value-added data, then they can use the approved vendor assessments, and they're approved from an RFQ process again. The state has a system for vendors to submit an assessment, and we review it to see if it meets student growth requirements, and then that list is updated annually. And if a district or a teacher has no value added and no approved vendor, then they have local measures that they can use, and those are made up of student learning objectives and or shared attribution. And generally that's just a shared measure. Most districts use value added, the district or the building level, as that type of information. So the approved vendor teachers are Category B, and the teachers with only SLOs and or shared attribution are Category C teachers. And now we have Matt, who's going to talk more about the Electronic Teacher and Principal Evaluation System, or ETPES as we lovingly call it in Ohio.
Thank you, Carolyn. So Carolyn had mentioned the ETPES system, and this system largely serves as our point for all of our collection data for the evaluation system. And I think it is telling that as we enter into year 2 of our full implementation, there is a setup process to the ETPES system that you have to pick from one of 3 options, which I will talk about. But as of today, we only have one LEA in the entire state that is not set up. Perspective-wise on that, last year we had hundreds that were not set up at this time and entered into the new year with 140 that had not touched the system. So it's quite a good move in the right direction for us that everyone is currently set up with the exception of one LEA. Again, this is our portal for collection of all evaluation data. There are 3 options. Carolyn, if you would turn the slide to option 1. In option 1, you use all of the Ohio teacher evaluation forms or principal forms. These are all state-generated forms. You use the system with what we refer to as heavy use of our system. You document all of your information within the system, and you sign off and authenticate with your teachers and or principals within the system. Option 2 is a combination of your local forms and our state forms. And these 2 options caused a great deal of consternation in the field because we were worried, our teachers were worried about the request for information. If we're putting everything into a single port, how easily accessible is this information to the general public? In Ohio, we have a very liberal sunshine law, and teacher evaluations are currently and have always been subject to a public records request. So what we have told people is that whether or not you choose option 1 or option 2 or option 3, which is all you put in is the final summative evaluation. So option 1, 2, or 3, all are subject to public records request. And if you had picked option 3, which is final summative only, a request could be made to your local school district for all of your paper forms that were on file as well. So in either direction, these are all public records. Interesting this year, as we looked at our setup data, it basically has rolled out to about a third, and a third across options 1, 2, and 3, which is just a slight drop off from the previous year. So while there has been a great deal of consternation regarding the public records requests, the system is still being utilized quite heavily. We at the department only see the final aggregate ratings for the districts and or school buildings. We do not have access to individual teacher ratings. This is in law that we are not able to have this. Let's we turn to the next slide, Carolyn. Stakeholder input. Throughout this process, throughout the evaluation process, we have made sure that we have reached out to a variety of groups over the past several years, including our Student Growth Measures Advisory Board, with student growth being weighted at 50% of the evaluation. We have sought out individuals with knowledge of value-added and vendor test data in those districts that have been quite progressive with our SLOs to seek input from them as we move forward in this process. We also engage our Educator Standards Board at the state level, which is heavily represented from both OEA, Ohio, and OFT, both of our teacher unions in the state, along with higher ed and a variety of other groups throughout this process. And ultimately, we have shared the data with the Ohio Educational Research Center, the OERC, and they will be providing us a report in December on our first year of full evaluation within the state. And they have also researched early implementers as to the pros and cons, and we have used their information to help guide us and make decisions in this process. Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to lessons learned to you.
Okay, the lessons learned, sorry, did somebody have a question? But we tried to sum them up into at least 5 big ideas that we had. The first would be finding the right balance of materials and then making modifications or revisions to those materials. I think because our timeline was so short, and by the time our first legislation was passed in September of 2011 to when we first rolled out in March of 2012, the 3 categories of teachers and the value-added measures, everything was very tight from that September date on. And obviously because we're a state agency, we feel the need to put out the best guidance for the states, for the local agencies, because this is high stakes. So we felt the need to constantly revise and improve our documents because we did feel such a rush to get them out. We couldn't spend as much time as we wanted to, but I can tell you that the field didn't really appreciate that. They just get frustrated with, well, why did you change this, or what was updated, what's different, and that document than what it was last month. So as much as you want to try to keep improving things, that we would advise that you keep that at a minimum. And in addition to our just need to put out the best information that we could and to do the best, we also had our revised code. Our law was changing at least every 12 months. So we were forced to make those changes to the information that we put out. So keeping those revisions or those updates to your guidance at a minimum is a good piece of advice from us, from someone who's been there and done that, because the field just gets frustrated by that. Number 2 would be to definitely leverage as many regional resources as you can. We use those educational service centers, and I know each state kind of has their own name for those, but they're those regional hubs for us that work throughout the state. And with over 1,000 education agencies or entities in the state, we needed help to get messages out quickly and to put out fires, to stop miscommunication. So we used those service centers as much as we could. We trained some of their staff. We just kind of put out feelers for who would like to be trained on these new student growth measures, and then offer training to your local agencies. And every ESC in the state sent at least one person, usually more, to that training, and they helped us roll that training out around the state. We also used a vendor. Our vendor was AIR, and they conducted trainings for us around the state. And that kind of leads me into number 3, that it's important that you have at your department as a state agency, state-trained staff that can field those questions and be at as many of those trainings as possible. As our vendor conducted the trainings around the state, we made sure that we had somebody that from our agency that was there to answer the really detailed questions, because it always comes down to, in my district and in my building, we have this type of situation, so how can we make this work? And we also had, which I'll let Matt talk about, in number 4, some specialists that were doing training throughout the state.
One of the great opportunities we allowed for our LEAs in our state was an opportunity to receive training in assessment literacy, and we were able to conduct this training through some of our Race to the Top funds, and we hired 6 specialists to work with our LEAs around assessment literacy. We've also created some modules online through Battelle for Kids in their portal, so that the work will continue to live on. We also have brought in our OTES, our teacher evaluation trainers, and our OPES, our principal evaluation trainers, in for ongoing professional development for themselves, as well as to ensure that we continue to message to the field the most current and most accurate information possible. The field has also wanted to see student learning objective exemplars. And what we've run into here is we have not been able, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, that we haven't been able to deliver these as quickly as people would like. One is that what people thought were exemplary was not exemplary, and the other part was we didn't want to put something out that people just cut and pasted and used at the local level. That is not the idea behind student learning objectives. And so these are lessons that we've learned, and we've seen much more around the student learning objectives being posted nationally, but we have certainly been out on the front edge of that work, and people have looked to us to help guide that. We did not have exemplars out, and so we are continuing to work to get those posted in a way that can be used by the field, but at the same time not just be replicated verbatim. Carolyn, you want to talk about 1 year, after 1 year of implementation?
Yes. As we mentioned in the beginning, last year was our first full year of implementation. And during that year, obviously we had lots of hopes and dreams about what we would like to accomplish over this past summer to try to provide some guidance to the districts. As I mentioned earlier, most districts are just in that state of checking it off the list, and we survived year one of implementation. They're not ready yet to stop and look at that valuable data that they have and to try to determine what's helpful there and helping to change what's going on in the building or in the district that would improve student learning. So with us being able to step back, not being in the trenches where they are right now in survival mode, we had some goals that we wanted to try to do this summer. Our thought was to just try to create some basic PowerPoints with the notes or the talking points in them that district could just pull off the web and use with their staff to initiate the types of conversations around these 4 items. And we chose these items because these were the ones that either districts really hadn't had a chance to step back and look at, or because this is where most of the questions last spring, as our first full year wrapped up, when administrators or teachers were calling, that these were the things that they were focused on or wanted help with. Obviously, the first one is, now that they have all of this data around the evaluation and around the 3 types, more than likely most districts had 3 types of growth measures, what did it mean, and how can we group it and organize it, and what can it be telling us, or what should it be telling us if we're looking at it the right way? And then also, which GTL, Great Teachers and Leaders, has a professional learning module on using evaluation data to inform professional development. Our whole system, as we mentioned earlier, starts with the teachers beginning the year with either that professional growth plan or that improvement plan, and its aim is to identify where they want to make improvements or where they want to be better, and then to help them find the professional development at that individual level that they need to get better and to make improvements. So that GTL module, we actually we did a demo in the state for them, and we've used that in a training this past June to try to roll out, but I think most of the districts just aren't ready to think about that yet at that level, regrettably. And also, our districts are encouraged to have a student growth measure plan that just outlines, these are the 3 types of growth measures, and these are the types that they may or may not be using, and then the weights that they assign, because obviously a teacher's final student growth measure for the year can vary greatly depending upon the weight that they may have assigned to the approved vendor or to the SLOs. The value added in our state, the weight is basically set in law. It has to be proportionate to the teacher's schedule. Of their 50%, it is proportionate to their teaching schedule for which courses they have or that they instruct value added. And then how to analyze the student learning objective targets that the district had approved, basically, because our SLOs are approved at the local level, typically in building-wide committees. So most of the districts realized right away that the SLOs they approved probably shouldn't have been approved. And we do have a calibration module that we created with, again, our vendor AIR, that the main goal of that module was to help the districts ensure that they were all consistently approving SLOs at the same high level of rigor. We don't think most of them actually looked at it because they realized then and were calling back and asking, how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? Most of the comments, or a lot of the comments, were that our teachers that probably shouldn't have been accomplished ended up being accomplished, more than likely because they set those SLO targets too low. And then our teachers that should have been accomplished actually ended up on the low end as either ineffective or developing, which is our 2 lowest levels, because I think our high flyers tend to be hardest on themselves and their students, so they set their targets too high and then weren't able to reach those targets because they were just being too rigorous in the growth targets that they set. So for states that are coming on board and following in our footsteps, these are things that after year 1 we felt like districts really needed help with, so you might try to be ahead of the game where we were not able to be, and have these pieces ready for the districts after that first year so that they could look at those and maybe find answers to some of the questions that they have. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tammy and Jackie.
Great. This is Liz again. Thank you so much, Carolyn and Matt, for sharing your experiences. I think there were a lot of great lessons learned there, and hopefully some of our participants can take those and start to think about how they might implement some of those strategies to address their challenges and implementing new teacher and principal evaluation systems.